Great. So I'm delighted to welcome Stewart Kelly from Ground Truth Intelligence to Fin Spotlight today. Thank you for joining me today, Stewart. Great to have you on. We're going to talk a lot about investigations today, and there are that I know you and Ground Truth Intelligence are really focused on. But maybe just to set the scene a little bit, it'd be great to and maybe provide a little bit of background. Could you just do a quick intro to yourself and Ground Truth Intelligence?
Yeah, so Ground Truth is a platform for enhanced due diligence and investigation. So we enable users to access information from all over the world, inputs into investigations or due diligence that are not otherwise available through desktop means or through automated means. So we provide a kind of one-stop shop, efficient way for our users to access that type of information.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting a concept as well. So maybe focusing in on investigations and getting into that subject, obviously a topic that you guys are, as I said, really focused on. What are the typical scenarios that where financial institutions need to carry out some form of investigation, and I guess maybe what do those investigations typically involve?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I probably the key word is enhanced. There's an awful lot of jargon flowing around the place, as you'll know, and your viewers will know. But over the last 10 years or so, as the regulatory requirements have increased, there's been a lot of innovation in automated solutions for diligence. Whether that's onboarding, KYC, kind of basic background checks and due diligence. Lots of service providers out there, but it all relies on information that is digitized, information that you can scrape from the internet. So it's very handy and easy for financial crime compliance teams these days in banks to be able to grab that information quite quickly and efficiently. The problem arises, of course, when that information runs out. So whether you need to dig a step deeper from what you've already got automated, or when you're dealing with jurisdictions where the information simply isn't digitized, and so the machine comes back with zero. So when your business, for the financial crime compliance teams, when the business wants to proceed with a transaction and you've pressed all the buttons at your disposal and you've come back with absolutely nothing, now what do you do? So that's really the use case, to put it in kind of pretty blunt terms. We help these in-house financial crime compliance teams in financial institutions take that next step in their due diligence beyond what's available automatically. And really, we should emphasize that this is a tiny percentage of cases, right? So financial institutions are dealing with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands or more of third parties, customers, etc. There's quite a small number that fit into this category requiring enhanced checks. And this is where over recent years, banks have actually hired in-house teams to run those, and some other financial institutions too, and they tend to be our users.
What are the today? What's the process that most of those teams are doing to try and obviously you touched on the problem that you guys are helping to solve. What's the process that most of them are doing today? What are the sort of main challenges around that type of investigation?
Yeah, I mean, the way we see it is there's this kind of big gap that they've got. There's so many tools out there, and many of them featured on your website. Different ways that you can obtain things online. But there's almost been nowhere else for them to turn other than to go to a traditional advisory firm to obtain the necessary information. Now, that worked really well historically when you had very small numbers of cases requiring enhanced checks. So you might do a few dozen or less cases a year where you would go to an advisory, and it might take quite a bit of time. You get quite a detailed report. And obviously the work that those advisories do is very sophisticated. But when you're getting into a scenario where there are hundreds or thousands, it's just not practical or efficient to go to that level of scrutiny or to incur those costs. So this is really where we've tried to come in and really solve that problem for the users who need a little bit of additional information, but they don't necessarily need a 50-page report or an extremely in-depth expert investigation of the type they would get from an advisory firm. They might simply need to obtain, shareholder information for a company in, Mexico. And maybe they can't scrape that from the web. Or they might need to be able to demonstrate that, a factory that a client claims they have in, a remote part of China actually exists, and can we demonstrate that it exists, and can someone go and take a picture of it and verify that? So there are a lot of these what we call tasks, simple pieces of information gathering, that it's not necessarily advice that's required or big analysis that's required. It's just this very specific, discrete information input that can fit into the whole picture and allow the business to proceed. And so it's really for our users, it's being able to have at their fingertips those information inputs. We're not advisors or analysts or anything of the sort. It's feeding those in-house teams with those inputs.
So quite often, when you're getting, I guess, a mandate or a request from a financial institution, is it quite task oriented, of like they've got like a specific set of requirements that need sort of satisfying, and it might be, as you said, can you go and prove that this building exists and on this street, or can you go and fetch this document? Is it quite task oriented in terms of what they're sort of telling you, rather than can you go and investigate, like do the investigation for us?
It's a mix, and actually it's something that I know that you probably see a lot, and some of your viewers do as well, is it actually depends, I suppose, on the institution itself and how the institution is set up to do this type of work. So you some who would be already quite far along in their agility, for want of a better word, in how they manage these issues, and they tend to be the ones who would come up with a task, where they would have an in-house team, often staffed by people who've been in investigations, advisories in the past, and they've kind of exhausted their own in-house resources, and they know what they need, and they're coming for something very specific, or possibly a volume of very specific things, often even in a batch, as we call it. Maybe they've lined up 20 different third parties from a particular country, and they know that it's actually more efficient to come to us and say, right, give us this piece of information for these 20 third parties, and that takes care, we'll feed that back into our own internal analysis. And those tend to be the institutions, as I say, that are a bit farther ahead in their journey, I suppose. And then there are others that will come and almost want to use us, as they would an advisory, and would say, can we have an enhanced due diligence report on XYZ third party? We want to help institutions move toward the former category. There's no, why obtain a whole lot of information that you maybe don't need, or that you can obtain yourselves? Fill those gaps, and then this is where the advisories really come to the fore as well. That they're not spending time on pretty simple information gathering; they're providing that more sophisticated analysis and advice into these teams, which is an area that we don't get involved in. So, as I say, it's a real mix, and I think that mix tends to reflect the institution and how it's approaching these issues, and the kinds of teams and tools they've already got at their disposal.
I guess working with these different institutions, you see different models, as you say, and different levels of maturity or agility within those teams. What are some of the ways that teams can improve the way they do investigations or their own process? And maybe what like, have there been some really good examples of you've seen that you could be like, oh, maybe that's kind of best practice, and maybe what are some of those kind of things that you've seen which could really show what good looks like in this?
Yeah, I suppose it's taking the kind of, we're obviously not experts in in how financial institutions should run their compliance programs, but these are the ones that tend to run what they would call a risk-based approach, where they would have a series of escalations, and they're looking to fill those gaps at every level of investigation, rather than taking kind of blanket box check approach. We've heard, for example, if you look at something like politically exposed person, there's a vast array of types of people who would fall into the net of politically exposed person, right, by definition. And there are some institutions that might just rule out a third party purely because they are flagged on a PEP screen and that's it, and there's no kind of work to kind of dig deeper into what that actually entails. So that's just one illustration of where you have some institutions that would have that in-house capability to say, okay, we've already checked the PEP list, we've already checked all the rest of it. Can you answer this question? Or can you find this piece of information? So it's really where there's clearly an internal structure to kind of accept the nuance of these third parties and to have a systematic way of digging deeper without necessarily incurring loads of cost, as opposed to this kind of yes, no, up, down approach, that we see in other areas. But, I wouldn't want to say there's a good or a bad. Obviously, this also relates to institutions' risk appetite, reputation concerns, their own structures as well,
I suppose one thing we associate with high risk cases is the time taken to kind of do those reviews, and whether that's at onboarding or whether it's through a regular review process. What is this? Is this quite like I think to me it appears that this can be quite another string to the bow for financial organizations in terms of speeding up that process for them, making that process more robust as well. Have you been able to sort of does this help increase the speed of things as well, or fundamentally is it more focused on, look, we can just make sure that the information collected is correct, you get the right information, you can make that decision, or is it a bit of both?
No, speed is a big part of it, and it's not the only part, but it is it's a natural byproduct of the model. If you're linking, our model is to have thousands of collectors located all over the world who obtain these pieces of information, curated, vetted on our platform, and we enable our clients to interact with them directly. So if the client comes in and needs a document from a remote part of the world, the client is able to interact directly with the person getting those documents. So not only does that increase the speed at which they get that information, the only sort of constraint is how quickly you can get it from the public registry or whatever the local place they're getting it from, and then it's uploaded onto the platform and instantly available to the client, and the client can then chat with the person on the ground where additional nuance is needed. So it provides that kind of investigative paper trail, that information provenance, but at the same time you're completely cutting out the layers of processing that would be required for a detailed report. So again, there's a time and a place for detailed reports, and we wouldn't dispute that at all. It's just that oftentimes in-house teams need to move really quickly, get the information inputs quickly and efficiently, and then kind of move on. And so that's what we're enabling, rather than kind of having a long processing time for report writing, analysis, packaging, all of those things that in some cases the user doesn't need.
Yeah. Maybe a good segue in actually, but I just want to ask about the coverage actually that you guys have, and maybe also where you're seeing a lot of demand in terms of whether it's specific regions or countries where people are using you guys sort of maybe more extensively to investigate. I think it's really interesting that some of the geographies that maybe you guys cover and areas as well.
Yeah, it is truly global. I suppose there's some countries that come up all the time that you would expect, China, Russia, Nigeria, Brazil, sort of large emerging markets. But the part of the reason for having this truly global coverage is to have a solution for where clients encounter really obscure jurisdictions. So we've had requirements for people on the ground in Yemen, in St. Kitts and Nevis, Guadeloupe, another one recently. So even if the financial institution is located in London and the third party is located in London, that doesn't mean that their footprint doesn't extend all over the world. And so that's where it's not so much that the bank has, has huge business in Guadeloupe. It means that perhaps, an important client maybe originated in Guadeloupe or has activities in Guadeloupe, and now suddenly you have to do verifications and checks in Guadeloupe, just as just as an example. So that's why we've ensured that we have comprehensive coverage, because it's no good to the user if you say, well, we're good in Belarus, but we're not good in Belgium. Then they're not going to be able to rely on it, you know. So you have to have that comprehensive coverage. So as I say, it's the large emerging markets you would expect, but then all kinds of wonderful different locations are requested, and thankfully we've built the network to be able to deliver.
I think it's really interesting a concept actually. I really like it. What I mean, maybe touching on investigations, as you said, or is maybe a bit of the process which hasn't had as much innovation as other areas of the process. You touched on that early on in terms of saying, look, a lot of public information or more accessible information has been or is being scraped and aggregated by different providers, and there's a few different ones out there. But the investigations area seems to have had less attention, and despite the high risk cases costing the most money, taking the most amount of time, and providing the most amount of risk to the banks. So almost like the easy bit's been done. This is the harder bit. Where do you see some of the innovation potentially coming in the next few years in this space, or where do you think it, within the process it might be innovated?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that the investigations piece or the enhanced diligence piece has seen the least investigation. I think where we take the view that it's not the hard bit necessarily, that it's harder than the automated pieces you have now, but our whole premise is that actually some of it is relatively easy to standardize and systematize, and that's what we're doing. We're not trying to bite off the entire value chain of enhanced diligence or investigations. We're saying, look, some of what's done manually and in an advisory context is very bespoke and is very one-off and does kind of need, experienced, well-trained practitioners. But actually, some of it can be just, driven by machine and scaled. So, that's where we're intervening, is to say that the information inputs that can be scaled should be scaled, and you can only imagine, in the kind of, let's say, 100 cases involving Guadeloupe anywhere in the world in any given month, if it is about 100, that's 100 different people scratching their heads about how on earth do we get this information from Guadeloupe. So why not have a platform that can do that the same way every time? Because it is the same way every time. And then if you expand that, throughout the world into every jurisdiction, and you scale that up, you've suddenly got a systematic approach that was previously involved people scrambling around, scratching their heads time and time again. So we don't necessarily see it as kind of systematizing or standardizing the hard bit. It's taking the easy bit of the hard bit and standardizing that. I think where it's going is, at least as we see it, is the user still suffers a little bit. This is where some of the challenges in our world of diligence and investigations is that users are not particularly well served for information inputs, despite the fact that requirements for diligence and investigations have increased so much. Users, be they in-house in financial institutions, in-house in large corporates, or even the analysts and advisors in the large consultancies, don't yet have the tools at their disposal to do their work efficiently. So they're spending so much time trying to source information and not enough time analyzing, processing, and providing advice on top of that information. So we want to participate in, and where we see it going, as well as with other really excellent companies out there that I'm sure you're familiar with, is streamlining those information inputs so that it becomes easier and easier for the analysts and the advisors to get the information that they need. And then that allows them more time and space to provide really good analysis and advice on top of that. And that's the kind of ideal scenario for the technology intervention in the sector. It's not to replace what smart human beings are doing. It's to enhance it and to take away the administrative burden, the kind of repetitive challenges that could be solved through using technology. Let's do that, and let's let these people do what they do best.
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? It's taking the sourcing bit out of the equation, get it to them quickly, and then let them focus on investigation, right? The analysis and due diligence. Maybe just a quick one in terms of ground truth intelligence, still reasonably young. What's the next couple of years look like for you guys? Obviously, you built the platform, you built a network of people around the globe. What's the next couple of years look like for you?
Yeah, so the next step really is improving the platform. So we've version 2 coming out in October, and really what that is providing tools for the user for processing the information a lot more easily. We hope that's the plan, and really remove as much of the friction as possible in sourcing that information, and to automate it as much as possible. So where there's a standardized way of doing something, to allow the user just to come in, press a couple of buttons, and have that local person on the ground providing that information, within 24 hours, rather than having to engage in any kind of detailed scoping discussion. So it's really, if you think about the network and the platform being the first phase, it's that standardization and systematization, if that's a word.
I think you can get away with it.
Get away with that one. Good. Is in that second phase, so that anything that can be standardized is, and then you're obviously left with some of those pieces that are bespoke, and that's fine, and they'll always be there. But let's organize the pieces that can be. So that's really the next phase for us in October, and then obviously, we're 8 full-timers now. We'll have more people joining later this year, and then looking forward to further growth next year.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me today, Stuart. Really interesting to hear what you guys are up to and what part of the problem you're trying to solve. Thank you for joining me, and good luck with the systematization and standardization in the coming year or two.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure.
All right. Bye.